I have something that people need to hear. There's something nasty living in Croatan National Forest. That's in North Carolina, and a place I wish I'd never been. When I was young, I wrestled alligators for a living. I don't scare easy, and I know nasty when I see it. I'm not talking about a bear or a coyote, understand? I hadn't been in North Carolina long. I did most of my work around Mississippi at the time. Lots of alligator wranglers in Mississippi, though. Back then, work was available in North Carolina, and I was available for work. I hadn't found a house yet. I hadn't found much of anything except a cheap motel and a bar where I could leave my business card. I got the call when I was close to giving up. Another day without a paycheck might have sent me back home. Lucky for me, Linda's morning had started with an 11-footer on her front lawn. Linda's not her real name. She doesn't need to get wrapped up in this. Don't go digging, okay? Alligator wrangler, let me tell you what that means. Mount the back, squat, crank the gator's neck. It sounds cruel, but if you aren't locking in the camel clutch like you're the Iron Sheik, you're going to get bit. Restrain the gator however you got to and then relocate it to someplace safe. Try not to get bit on the way out. That's all there is to gators. 11-footer isn't a joke, though. It took me a while to size her up, but I got her wrangled and I got paid. Loaded her into my truck for transportation. You're welcome, Linda. Should I have had another pair of hands with me? Probably. Could I afford to pay someone at the time? Not unless I was eating ice cubes for dinner. The drive out to Croatan wasn't far. I had to take it slow on account of my passenger, but we got there without any hiccups. Got deep into them trees, too deep, I guess. The ground underneath the truck was soft. What's important is I got the gator out. Banged my elbow pretty bad, but I got her out and let her go, and she ran until I couldn't see her anymore. I thought she was scared of the truck. I thought most things would have been. Usually an engine will clear an area of any wildlife for at least a couple hours. I had turned the truck off before I jumped out, but I was still surprised to realize that the gator and me weren't alone. There was a great loud whooping in the trees around me. It echoed so many times that I had to spin around. I saw a whole lot of nothing in every direction. It was weird, though. I knew that immediately. The wailing or the whooping, whatever you want to call it, it sounded like that kind of yelling the chimpanzees do. If you had told me I'd wandered into some nature documentary, I would have believed it. After all, there aren't any apes in North Carolina. The only time I heard whooping like that was at 2 a.m. with the TV on and a drink in my hand. This wasn't TV, though. It made my skin crawl. The hair stood up on my forearms. I jumped back in the truck in too much of a rush. When I hit the gas, my tires spun and sunk into the mud outside. Doesn't get much worse than that, does it? What choice did I have? I cut the engine again and jumped out. Had to get free somehow. Before I could inspect the tires too closely, there was a banging. The sound echoed again, but this time I got a good idea of which direction it was coming from. Someone out in the woods was going major league on a tree, swinging a bat or a branch or who knows what. Do animals knock on trees like that? I still don't know of any. I thought maybe someone was playing a prank on me, welcoming the outsider to North Carolina with a bit of fun. I called out, told whoever it was to knock it off. Then the nasty thing in Croatan National Forest called back. It roared. Screamed, really, like a man in a fight for his life. Something bigger than me, bigger than any animal I'd seen, ran between the trees in the distance. Red fur, I think. Covered head to toe. I jumped back in the truck and figured I had one chance. I rocked from forward to reverse, trying to sway my way out of whatever hole I'd dug. I remember whispering to myself like a lunatic. I probably should have been praying, right? Instead, I was muttering every curse I could to motivate myself to escape. Then it slammed into the side of my truck. Hit the passenger side like a linebacker. I never heard steel cry like that. The whole side of the vehicle got bent out of shape. Windows cracked. I didn't care about any of that. What mattered was that the beast had pushed my truck free of the mud. When it landed back on all 4 tires, I tried reverse again and peeled right out of the woods. There was another flash of fur in my rearview mirror. I think it wanted to make sure I didn't change my mind. I didn't. I got out of there as quick as I could. Got out of North Carolina, too. I guess that's why this story felt important to tell. Whatever lives in that area, it doesn't want me there. Mississippi isn't so bad, though, even if the gator market's a little oversaturated. I'm hoping this reaches someone else who has experienced something like I have. Nobody I've talked to believes me, and it makes me feel crazy. Even my mom and dad laughed at me, and they're supposed to be supportive, right? I've been called a nerd and a dork because I like astronomy. All my friends rolled their eyes when I asked for a telescope for Christmas instead of a PlayStation like all the other kids wanted, but that's what I did. And I have seen some cool stuff up there in the sky. I always check the weather reports. Clear nights are a gift for anyone interested in watching the stars. I passed my driver's test the month before, so I had the freedom to drive where I wanted and set up my telescope. My parents trusted me, probably because they knew I was a nerd. I drove further than I had before. Not really far, but maybe 30 minutes from where I live. The area where I went is quiet. A big bluff overlooking a quiet beach area. I was stoked because the sky was mostly clear and there were only a few clouds. There was no rain in the forecast. I set up my telescope and made sure everything was perfect. I was just about ready to start observing the sky when I noticed a shadow crossing over me. Everything went dark for a moment. I looked up and saw something moving just out of my vision. It looked like a bat, but it was way bigger. I thought maybe there were eagles or some other kind of nocturnal bird flying around. I looked up at the sky and waited to see what was up there again. Whatever I saw didn't come back. I felt a little spooked, probably just being out at night alone. There's nothing dangerous around there unless you're afraid of mosquitoes, maybe. I brushed it off, remembering my scientific mind. I set my eye to the telescope and looked out to the stars. Everything up there was beautiful, and in a second or two I forgot about seeing any shadow flying above me. And that is exactly when it happened again. This time I had my eye looking through the telescope, and my vision went black. I jumped back and almost knocked my telescope over. I barely grabbed it in time before it went crashing down. I looked up and again saw something strange and shadowy moving across the sky. It had wings and was maybe the size of a person. I couldn't tell from where I stood, but it made me uneasy. Suddenly I felt very alone out there with just my telescope. I wished I had brought a friend or my dad, but nobody else cared about looking up at the stars. I stood there and watched the sky for 15 minutes or so. I couldn't peel my eyes off the sky. I expected to see it at any moment. I couldn't tell if I was scared or curious. I was a little of both, I guess. Nothing flew overhead. I thought it was probably an optical illusion, or maybe my brain just made it up. After all, I did spend a lot of my time looking through a telescope, hoping to see things. I was about to put my telescope away and run back to my car and get out of there when I saw the shadow again. It soared directly above me. I was awestruck. I thought it could be the military doing some flight suit experiment. It looked like a man. I was confused, and now I was truly scared. As I watched it cross over the sky, two red glowing eyes looked down at me. I almost screamed. I stumbled and watched it do an arcing turn in the sky and come back toward me. The eyes seemed to be locked in on me. It was coming directly at me. I'm certain of it. It came lower and lower, and those eyes never blinked at all. I could see now it was definitely something like man, but thin, like it needed to eat. The skin was an almost translucent black. It had wings. They were black and shiny. I had no intention of that thing getting anywhere near me. I left my telescope there and ran to my car. I felt stupid when I locked the door, like it would protect me from whatever the hell that thing was. I sat there and tried to catch my breath. I collected my thoughts as best as I could and looked up at the sky through my car window. I braced myself to see it diving right toward me, but it was gone. I went to the other side of the car and looked. There was nothing up there except the night sky and a couple clouds. I sat there in the driver's seat for a while. Every minute or so, I would look up above. Half of me hoped to see it so I would know I wasn't crazy, and the other half of me hoped I wouldn't see anything at all. I knew I had to get out of there. I was about to open the door and run and collect my telescope as fast as possible when the windshield of my car darkened. The shadow of that thing. It was flying directly above me again. I said the hell with my telescope and turned the key in the ignition. I've never driven that fast in my life, and I probably looked like a drunk because I kept checking out the window for a shadow following me or to see red eyes glowing up there in the sky. I wasn't driving as safely as I should have, but I couldn't help it. I needed to outrun whatever it was with those red eyes. I spent the entire drive home so scared of whatever was flying around up there that I forgot of an excuse to tell my parents about my telescope. We used to play ghost games when we were kids, but I never really believed in them until I actually saw one for myself. I used to have a job at the local movie theater when I was home from college for the summer. Me and a couple of my friends worked as morning cleaners. It was a fairly big building with 3 big screen rooms, 4 mid-sized screens, and 3 small screens. My job was to clean all the screening rooms. My shift went from 4 a.m. to 10 a.m. It would take me about 20 minutes to get to work from where I lived. The theater was out in an area that was kind of in the middle of nowhere. The first couple weeks that I worked there, nothing out of the ordinary happened. Typically, there would only be 2 or 3 of us working during a shift. Most of the time I was alone, cleaning and listening to my iPod. Sometimes we'd meet up with the day shift when they arrived and give them details on any maintenance issues and stuff that we were dealing with. One day in particular, my manager asked me if we'd ever noticed the front doors being unlocked when we arrived in the morning. I told him I had never noticed that. He said that customers had been complaining about a tall, lanky man in a suit that had been following them from theater to theater and sometimes into the bathroom. A couple times people had come to the ticket area really frightened. They would describe a man almost 7 feet tall wearing a black suit, and they always said he was wearing one of those old-fashioned bowler caps. Apparently he would walk slowly after them like he was stalking them, and he seemed threatening. But whenever a theater employee went to check it out, there was no sign of him. A few times the police were even called. It became so common that business started to suffer. Everyone just referred to him as the tall man. Occasionally an employee would catch a glimpse of him sneaking into a theater. But whenever they pursued him, the theater would turn out to be empty. So there were 10 theater rooms total, but Theater 5 seemed to be the one where the tall man was most often seen. Nobody wanted to clean out Theater 5. When I first started, I was fairly naive about ghosts and spirits, and I didn't feel that apprehensive about them. So they kept assigning me to be the one to clean it out. Theater 5 was in a unique spot since it sat behind the bathrooms in the lobby. In order to get to it, you had to walk down a long hallway before reaching the screening room. Being that far back made you the most secluded, especially when it was 4 a.m. and the only other people were on the other side of the building. It was strange. People cleaning there would complain of nosebleeds, constant headaches, and a feeling of being watched. Usually in the morning, if you were the first to arrive, it was your job to walk up into the projector rooms and turn on the lights in all the theaters. It was an easy job, but the top floor with the projectors had a lot of life-size cutouts of movie characters and massive posters, and in the dark it could be a little creepy. I had done this several times before, and since I was the first to arrive, I went about turning the lights on. The projector area itself was dark. We would usually carry a flashlight with us while going around flipping switches. I was walking through the dark hallway of projectors, flipping everything on. I had forgotten my iPod, and I was whistling "Don't Worry, Be Happy" to myself as I walked down the corridor. I started getting that feeling of being watched again. I looked out several yards away, and in the area with the projectors overlooking the IMAX theater rooms, something was staring back at me. I stopped whistling and tried to focus my eyes. I knew it must be one of the cardboard cutouts. They were everywhere, so I kind of dismissed it and was about to flip the next switch when the cutout moved and I froze. It was a figure hunched over. It was whistling the tune I had been whistling. It was imitating me, but it was doing it much slower. That really creeped me out. My heart started pounding. It rose up from its crouch until it was standing at least 7 feet tall. It was a man. All I could see was a silhouette against the red exit sign lights and some of the projector computer monitors. It started coming toward me and kept whistling really slowly. I wanted to move, but for some reason my feet were cemented to the floor and my mouth had gotten so dry I couldn't scream. I didn't know what to do. It was definitely the tall man. He took some steps toward me. He walked crookedly like he had a bit of a limp in his left leg. It was like a nightmare with that guy limping toward me. He had taken about 3 or 4 steps toward me when suddenly he rushed at me, and I felt ice cold like he went right through me. Then he was gone. I turned around and ran down the steps and found my boss and the rest of the crew. I told them what had happened, and thank God they believed me after all the reports they had heard. They all tried to reassure me and say that he had never been known to hurt anyone, probably just enjoyed spooking people. I didn't care, though. That experience alone was enough to make me put in my 2 weeks' notice. It was way too creepy for me. I've been a park ranger for 15 years. I worked most of that time in the ponderosa forests of Arizona, but a few years ago I headed back up north. My family's from Twin Falls, Idaho. My parents are getting older, so I wanted to be closer to check on them more often. I got a post at Craters of the Moon National Monument. I had a research position, so I was moving into a pretty remote station. It was quite a distance from the nearest town. After I moved in, it seemed like things kept going wrong. The solar power was glitchy and wasn't working half the time. My sleep was suffering from weird disturbances. There were a lot of species of bats there, which was fine, but they kept getting into my cabin somehow. I kept getting awakened by flapping and squeaking. I couldn't find how they were getting in. I lived in the middle of juniper and scraggly pine and sagebrush, and for some reason that landscape gave me an eerie feeling. It felt so different from the southwest ponderosa forest that I was used to. About 2 months into the job, I started hearing something walking and scratching on the deck at night. Sometimes it even sounded like it was scratching on the door. The area was known for its wood rats, so I chalked it up to that. Whenever I went to check it out, nothing was there. I assumed they scurried away when I opened the door. Then I started finding these dismembered bats. Sometimes they were torn in half, but mostly I'd just find their wings on my deck. I've always been a relaxed person, so the fact that I was feeling so edgy was out of character for me. Whenever I'd leave the cabin at night, I had an eerie feeling like I was being watched. One night I was getting back from my shopping run that I did once a week. While I was parking, I got a bad feeling. At the time, I didn't have my shotgun in the vehicle. I got out of the truck and was hit by this heavy smell. It was like a mix of wet dog and super concentrated urine. I went around to the passenger side to get my groceries. I looked to the left of the cabin and saw 2 glowing eyes about 50 feet from my front door. They looked to be about 5 or 6 feet in the air. I was freaked out, to say the least. I started yelling, "Get the hell out of here," but the eyes just crouched lower down. I assumed it might be a bobcat or a mountain lion, but I wouldn't normally associate that scent with a big cat, so that seemed odd. I threw a piece of wood toward it and it leaped back a bit, but it didn't make any sound. I threw 3 or 4 more pieces at it and it retreated a little further back. At this point, I abandoned the groceries and started fumbling with my keys. I made a mad dash for the front door and managed to get inside and get my shotgun. When I came out, the eyes looked a bit closer. I couldn't get a good look at it. It was out of range of the porch light. I didn't want to shoot if I didn't have to. I held the shotgun and kept throwing pieces of wood with one hand. Finally, it walked away into the brush. I waited for a good 10 or 15 minutes before I rushed to get my groceries and get back inside. I eventually calmed down enough to make dinner. I kept the shotgun right beside me. I couldn't imagine what was attracting it to my deck. I kept the place clean and was obsessive about not having a trace of food around. A couple hours later, I was sitting at the table reading and I heard that scratching sound again. This time I could swear I also heard this low growling sound. By then I was feeling like a nervous wreck. It felt like the thing was stalking me. I went to the window and raised the blinds about an inch and looked out. I assume it saw the movement because when I looked out, it had its back to me and was heading off the deck. I just froze when I saw a bipedal monster over 6 feet tall. It wasn't a cat at all. It looked like an upright canine creature with a humped back and massive shoulders. The legs almost looked human but were huge, and the knees bent backward like a dog. I was just shocked at the size. When it got about 20 feet away, it turned around and I saw the face of a demonic-looking wolf. I was shaking so bad, but I managed to open the window a crack and was ready to shoot it right through the screen. It shot off into the darkness like a rocket. I've never seen something that big move that fast. I've never been so scared in my life. My mind had no reference point for an animal like that. I slept on the couch with my shotgun that night. I'm sure I woke up at least every hour thinking I heard something. In the morning, a trail crew came up and we found huge tracks on the porch and leading away from the cabin. Huge canine tracks with long claws. After that night, I always thought I heard scratching on the deck but never found tracks. I was afraid I was losing it. As soon as possible, I got transferred to the main guard station where I could be around co-workers a lot of the time. But eventually I convinced my parents to move to Arizona, and I went back to the park I was familiar with. I just couldn't take that kind of stress. This happened a long time ago. I was just a kid, but it still kind of haunts me all these years later. It's like a bad dream that occasionally pops back into my head on cold nights when I'm alone. I can still feel the chills in my flesh and hear the gut-wrenching screams of the boy I was with. My mother took me to my uncle's house during the summer break from school. He had just moved way out in the mountains in Tennessee after retiring from the Air Force. There were a few vacation cabins in his area that filled up in the summer months. I met a few other kids on the bike trail that wrapped around the creek right below my uncle's home. We would all ride together through the various trails that looped throughout the area, sometimes racing and sometimes just casually riding while trading jokes and whatnot. One evening shortly before sunset, a boy named Jared told us all a story about a haunted cabin nearby as we cruised through the winding dirt trails together. He claimed that it was only a 10-minute ride down the straight trail that veered off the main path by the creek. Jared dared me to go with him to investigate it. I knew I didn't want to go, and I had a bad feeling right from the get-go. But peer pressure and my desire to be accepted or liked by my new group of trail cruising friends was stronger than my sense of reason. I knew I had to be home before the sun set behind the mountains, or my mom would be super upset, so I told him to hurry up and take me. I was secretly praying that it was all just a joke and we would ride back laughing. But it was not a joke, and we didn't ride back laughing. After 10 minutes of riding the thin dirt road just as Jared had promised, we came to a broken gate collapsed in a bushed area. He turned and rode into the area, waving behind him as if telling me to catch up. I could see beyond the tall trees and bushy canopy the outlines of an old cabin. I tried to yell at him that I saw it. "We can turn around and go back now." "You were right," but he kept going towards it. Reluctantly, I pressed on slowly behind him until the cabin was just about 100 feet ahead of us. That's when he smashed the brakes on his bike. "What's wrong?" I asked him. "Do you see something?" He put his finger over his lips as if to shush me. Just then, I saw a light flick on inside the cabin. A shadow crossed by the window, and a jolt of cold air slid up from my toes and through my spine as it did. The whole area seemed to grow completely silent. The wind disappeared, and the trees stood completely still. It was like the whole forested area was trying to hide itself from something. That's when I noticed the eyes. Blood-red eyes glared from behind the cabin. They seemed to pulsate as they locked on us, like they were breathing. Just as the eerie silence was swallowing me whole, a vicious crack pounded from the large oak tree just beyond us. It sent a wave of cold vibrations through the hairs on my neck, and I could feel my muscles begin to tense and stiffen all through my back and legs. The bulging red eyes were now behind the oak tree just 10 or so feet away. "Go, go, go!" I screamed as my feet kicked into the pedals. As the two of us flew down the dirt road back towards the gate, I could hear thunderous stomps behind us gaining distance as each second passed. Just as I thought they couldn't get any closer, I heard Jared let out a horrid, ear-piercing scream. I had never heard anyone scream like that before or ever since. I could literally feel the fear expelling from his throat as the vibrations of his voice slithered up the back of my skull. I was too afraid to turn around. I pumped the pedals until my legs were shaking and tears were rolling down my cheeks. Just as I turned the corner at the broken gate, I peered over my shoulder just enough to get a glimpse of what was happening behind me. This massive black beast was inches behind Jared, running on 2 legs. It was towering over him like some sort of giant hybrid mutant. I don't know if this is even possible, but the beast almost seemed as if he was smiling as he ran behind Jared. A wide grin of razor-sharp teeth with a slobbery, wet tongue protruding forward towards Jared's back. Just as we both made it to the regular bike path that led to the gate, the beast stopped. I could hear the sound of the wind again and the leaves shaking in the trees. But most of all, I could hear the sound of Jared choking on his tears behind me. When we got back, I noticed that the back of his shirt was ripped from top to bottom. It had 3 long tears going from the collar of his shirt down to the bottom of his back. I don't know what happened to him after that. He and his family left in a rush early the next morning. I told my mom and uncle about it, but they assured me over and over again that it was a black bear. They admitted that we were indeed very lucky to escape from it, and I was forbidden to ride out of view from the house anymore. But I know that wasn't a bear. That was something manifested straight from the depths of somewhere evil, a being of pure evil lurking somewhere in the mountains of Tennessee. Sometimes when I'm walking alone, I can still see those red eyes appear in my peripheral vision, then disappear when I look. It's like they follow me everywhere I go, even when I sleep.